Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Therese Moscardo. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been in practice for about 10 years, I think over a decade now. And I'm originally, if you can't tell from my accent, I'm originally from California. Now I reside more or less full time in Lisbon, Portugal. And I love talking about mental health. I absolutely love it. I started an Instagram account a couple of years ago called Exploring Therapy, and that has become the community that I speak with about mental health, and just trying to destigmatize these conversations. So that's why I'm here. And I also have been running my practice remote for about 5 years now. So I know personally, in addition to working with my clients, exactly the things that we can go through as remote workers. And I know how hard it can be, how lonely it can be, how stressful and tiring it can be. So if that's you and you're watching, I just want you to know I get it. And we're going to be diving into all of that in our conversation today, because remote worker mental health is my passion. And I have some specific things that I'm going to be able to share with you that I think will help you today. Things that are easy to do, things that are doable for everyone. And so we're going to have some fun.
All right, I'm excited to hear it. So, guys, I would like to inform everybody, feel free to ask questions in the chat. I will be in the background, and then Therese, you can take the floor, you can do the presentation, and then we'll have, we'll try to have some time to answer questions after the presentation.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, June. So I think I'll be speaking for about 45 minutes. I'm going to try to move pretty quickly because I know this can be a lot of information. So if you would like access to this presentation afterward, just let us know and we'll make sure to get that to you. However, just as a lifelong learner myself, I do recommend that if you have something to scribble notes down in, why not do it? It helps our brain to engage with the content better. So if you want to scribble down some notes to help you just engage with our conversation, and please ask questions and engage. It helps me and it makes it more fun for me. So I am so grateful for getting to have this conversation with you folks today. One of the things that I just, full disclosure, want you to know about me and mental health is that I think mental health can often be a really stuffy conversation. And that's not what we're going to do today. Even though, yes, I have a doctorate and I'm educated in these things, I want to make sure that we know that mental health is a conversation for everyone. And I want to make it fun. So I don't know about you, but I am a huge fan of memes, like crazy about memes. I guess it's because I'm on Instagram a lot. And so I'll be sharing some memes with you. I hope that's okay. And just trying to keep this conversation, while very important, and obviously we're going to cover some serious topics, I also want to balance it with levity as well. So hashtag remote means, yes, Gonzalo, just trying to keep the mood light when we can, okay? So thank you guys so much for being here today, and we're gonna go ahead and dive in. So bear with me, I'm not the most technologically savvy person, but I'm gonna try to share my presentation with you today. Here we go. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about remote work and mental health. Specifically, I think there's a couple folks here who may be coming from different backgrounds. So I'm going to try to speak to kind of a wide range of experiences today. But again, let me know how I can speak to you with specific questions that you may have. Just a little disclaimer, we will be talking about some sensitive things today, some things that might bring up or trigger difficult emotions. I just want to give you a little advanced warning about that. So if for any reason you feel like you don't want to continue on with the presentation, that's fine. I won't be offended. You know, it's normal when we're talking about these things that some things may come up. But my hope is that we're going to give you some things that you can do to take control of whatever situation that you're in, respectively. And also, just a disclaimer, this is not therapy. Even though I'm a therapist, this is just a presentation. It's for educational purposes. So let's learn together and let's have some fun. All right, we're going to start with a quote, and June, you're going to have to let me know if there's any guesses here. I'm going to ask you if you can guess who this quote originates from. So let's read it together. Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. I love this quote. I love this quote because it gives us the permission and it gives this conversation importance that we need to have conversations about mental health and hard things. And so I'm just curious, does anyone have any guesses as to who said this quote?
Interesting. Yeah. Any guesses? But I love it. And also we have this. So I'm from the Philippines, of course. We're the reason and I are both Filipinos. And in our country, we have this really big stigma about mental health, and that we are not comfortable about talking about mental health. This is something like the Western people talk about. It's not something Filipino at all, right?
No, not at all.
And you know, about it.
Even being from a Western culture, mental health conversations are still stigmatized, even today, even though, you know, modern mental health has been around for over 100 years. So we really do need to just start having these conversations, because in doing so, we make it easier for everybody. So did anyone have any guesses? Was anyone brave enough to guess, June?
No guesses.
Okay. Well, this is someone you may or may not be familiar with, but is a beloved human being in the United States, and he's Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was an educator who taught on public television, and he used puppets, and his whole conversation was always about kindness and empathy. And we love our Mr. Rogers. So if you knew Mr. Rogers, you can appreciate this maybe a little extra, but he's a man who had a lot of wisdom. So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to have a conversation and just treat this like something we all should talk about. Okay? All right, so just a little bit more about me. As June mentioned, I am Filipina American, and I've been working remote for a long time. I'm a CEO and founder, so I know the stresses of being an entrepreneur for sure. And just in my personal life, I love food and travel. That's why I chose kind of that nomadic lifestyle several years ago, a little bit less nomadic in 2020. But I am so grateful for the freedom that remote work provides. Obviously, I'm going to be a little bit biased, but I think we also know that remote work can have some difficulties as well. So we're going to dive into that now. All right, here's our first meme. So here's a person saying, I don't know why I feel so useless and depressed right now. The therapist says, there's a pandemic. The person says, I think I'm just a lazy piece of bleep. The therapist says, there's a pandemic. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just snap out of it? And the therapist says, am I muted right now? So much of what we're talking about is how there is a pandemic going on, and it's so easy to forget. But I want to bring that into our conversation today, because the truth is what's happened in our world in 2020 has definitely added layers of complexity to what it means to be a remote worker. So if you are going through stuff right now, obviously you're not alone. I'm going to dive into some of the statistics of that in just a little bit, but it's important to give yourself a break, have a little grace for yourself, because we are in a global and somewhat traumatic situation. And I don't mean to cast negativity on what this work can be, because I think there's a lot of things out there that can help us, but we have to remember the context. Here's what we're going to talk about today. So first, when I say what in the world is happening, we're going to talk a little bit more about that context I just mentioned. Next, we're going to talk about the impacts of remote work on mental health. You may even be able to chime in here because you're experiencing it. The third and most important thing, most likely, is what you can do to improve your mental health. The next section is we're going to talk about moving from survive to thrive, and what is the difference between those two things. And then last, we'll talk about where to go from here, and I'll answer any questions that you have. So please get your questions ready. Okay, so let's start with what in the world is happening, and I have another meme. And this meme says, I can't remember, do I work at home or do I live at work? And you can see in this cartoon that there's a man who looks like he's got papers everywhere, kind of maybe not the most unstressful, calm place that he could be. And it's not looking like the best situation, right? Like either living at work or working at home, it may not always be the greatest thing. So I think one bucket of folks who are watching today is you're a remote worker, you're working at home, and you're dealing with all the different challenges that come with living your professional life and your home life blended together. So there's a lot that we're going to talk about that speaks to you in this conversation. And then there's another bucket of you, I think, And this is for you. It's a dog with a tie on a laptop, and it says, applying for jobs in the middle of a pandemic. And you can see that there's like a nuclear bomb going off in the background. And some of you, I think, are looking for work. And that can be such a tricky thing to navigate in the midst of all the things that you're going through personally. It can feel like there's a lot of scarcity. It can feel extremely stressful. And if that's you, I also feel like you have your own unique challenges. And so we'll speak to those as well. One last meme. So this is a therapist and a client laying on their sofa, and the therapist is covered in gear, COVID gear, and they ask the question, feeling any sense of social isolation during the pandemic? Whether you're working from home or looking to work from home, one of the biggest things that people are talking about and complaining about and dealing with right now is isolation. So if that's you, I hope that today we can also talk about some ways to try to lift what can be a very heavy feeling of being alone or being isolated during these times. So like I said, people respond to all of this different stuff very differently. There's a lot of different ways that we cope with difficult things. So I have this here. This is from my Instagram. During this time, it's normal to think about past relationships, be more irritable, have a hard time getting out of bed, feel antsy, eat differently than usual, have trouble sleeping. There's a lot of things that can happen right now as we increase our times in the remote working world. And especially for those of you who are shifting to this for the first time and dealing with all the different impacts that come with that. The truth is that with everything going on, even though we have a coronavirus pandemic, we also have a mental health epidemic. And so just some stats for you. 1 in 5 adults right now lives with a mental illness, 46.6 million people. Of those, less than half receive mental health services. So for those of you in Portugal, this is a group twice the size of the population of Portugal. That is a lot of people. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. I don't know about you, but when I heard that, I was completely shocked at that being the second leading cause of death. 50% of households in the US have had someone seek mental health treatment in the past year. Now, given the fact that I'm American, I know some of the things I'll share today will come from that perspective. If you have information about your respective countries, I'd love for you to share that with the group as well. A little bit more about how COVID has impacted by the numbers. In the US, 40 million people have claimed unemployment. Obviously, employment is a huge issue. There's been a disproportionate impact on people of color and women, and a whole bunch of other really tough stuff. Increased rates of suicide, domestic abuse, loneliness, as we know, increased substance abuse, gambling, interpersonal conflict, and increased demand for mental health services. So if you are feeling or experiencing any of these things, know that this is something that so many of us are dealing with. And just one more example, hotlines in California were experiencing an increase that was so severe that they couldn't keep up with the demand. So a place that normally had, I think, 60 calls was getting 1,800 calls for mental health support in a given day. What this is saying is mental health is more impacted than it ever was before, only exacerbated by what's going on with coronavirus. So let's talk about remote work and the impacts of remote work on mental health. This quote by Viktor Frankl is so helpful, I think. It says, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. When you've got something traumatic, scary, stressful going on, that's not normal to experience those things. So we don't react in normal ways. The truth is that remote work, as I said, has both positive and negative impacts on mental health. Let's take a look at a few. Some of the benefits. I know June is talking about these all the time. So increased freedom and flexibility, productivity. One report said 77% of people report being more productive when working from home. It can promote good work-life balance. There's increased opportunities and access for people with illnesses or disabilities, which is wonderful. Your work environment can be more comfortable. You can save time not having a commute. I'm from LA. My commute used to be 4 hours a day. I'm not sad to leave that behind. Reduce stress, another benefit of remote work, 82% reduction in stress levels, 82%. And you can have more time with family, which can definitely be a benefit. Now let's go into some of the potential risks, and feel free to add to this list. We've talked about loneliness and isolation. The tendency can be to have a more sedentary lifestyle, so just sitting all day long and not moving. There's many studies about the detrimental impacts of sitting on our health. One says that it's the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. Not very good. There's a lack of work-life balance. A lot of folks talk about how they work more hours when they're remote workers or have a hard time shutting down their laptops. You can have frustrations with your home office environment. If you're lucky enough to have a home office, you're one of the few. Lots of people don't have that luxury, and so you're working with family around. You might have noise. You might have internet that's not working very well. You know better than I do, so there can be some definite frustrations at home with all of these logistics. Communication difficulties with your team, right? So if you are working in a decentralized team, it can be so difficult to try to sort things out. And you used to be able to just walk down the hallway, and now you have to Slack them, or do you chat them, or do you email them? Or do you Zoom? So many options. And I have a friend who is working at a new company trying to build a team. And he was expressing to me his frustration because it's so much more difficult to build rapport with a team, because a Zoom meeting doesn't feel the same as just walking down the hallway or going out to lunch with someone. Maybe you can relate. Burnout is huge. Burnout is a huge thing with working from home. And I think maybe some of you here today are experiencing that as well. And then also another potential risk, more time with family too, because sometimes being with your family can be a fantastic thing, and other times it can be an added stressor. I want to share with you something that you may be familiar with. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I do it to give us a little context for what may be going on for us when we look at our mental health. So if you look at the bottom, we have what are called basic needs: food, water, shelter, things of that nature. But as you move up the pyramid, you have things that are more advanced, I might say, when it comes to meeting our psychological needs and needs for fulfillment. So, needing safety and security, needing friendships, needing a sense of belonging, and achieving self-actualization. When you think about the world that we're in right now, there may be many threats to our needs across this pyramid, right? So your relationships may be affected. Your access to safety and security may be affected. And it certainly can make it more difficult to reach those higher levels of the pyramid where you're in a place of self-actualization because of all the different things going on below. So here are 10 subtle signs your mental health is suffering. I share this because we're going to talk about the specifics of mental health issues, but I think the subtle signs sometimes are more important to look at, because a lot of times you're going to say, oh my gosh, that's me. So let's see. 1, you're more irritable than usual. Maybe you can, in your head, just note if any of these are you. 2, you notice changes in your eating. That could be eating more or eating less, or what you're eating is different. 3, you feel tired for no apparent reason. I'm going to put that in quotes, because there's usually reasons. 4, you find yourself isolating more than usual. 5, you've lost interest in the things you used to enjoy. In mental health, we call this anhedonia. Anhedonia is when you don't like the things, or you don't find enjoyment in the things that you used to like. 6, you notice an increase in alcohol or drug use. This is very common and has been talked about a lot lately in the media. 7, you have difficulty sleeping or have a hard time getting out of bed. Also another common one. 8, you notice yourself having more mood swings or not feeling like yourself lately. 9, you're experiencing more pain, headaches, digestive issues, or other bodily issues. We're going to go into in this further about the connection between our mind and our body. And 10, you feel an increase in the need to control things, and you become more frustrated when things don't go your way. Needing to control is a coping mechanism when the world feels out of control. So it's a very common thing that we'll see when folks' mental health is suffering. So anxiety, depression, and loneliness are the most commonly reported by remote workers. I just want to point out that mental health impacts physical health. A lot of times we are most likely to see the physical symptoms of mental health concerns than we are to actually notice or recognize that it's a mental health issue. And a lot of times I think it's because we give ourselves more permission, and society gives us more permission to have physical conditions, and we have more compassion for that than we do for mental health. So let's dive into a couple of the main things folks are expressing concern with right now when it comes to their mental health as remote workers. First, let's talk about anxiety. So there's kind of your everyday anxiety, and then there's clinical anxiety. So anxiety is the normal thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in response to stress, danger, or the unfamiliar. And it includes feelings of worry and fight, flight, or freeze, which you may be familiar with. I'll go into that in just a moment. Clinical anxiety is when those things interfere with your daily life. So they interfere with your relationships, they interfere with your ability to get your job done. And obviously, that's when we get most concerned. Although having anxiety of any level is normal, it's not pleasant necessarily to experience, and we want to minimize how much stress we're exposed to. Here are some of the symptoms of anxiety, and I won't dive into all of them, but just notice the physical symptoms here, right? So digestive problems, headache, insomnia, fatigue, excessive sweating, trembling, shaking, weakness, fatigue. Oh, I put fatigue in there twice. Sorry, guys. Shortness of breath, hyperventilation, chest pain, palpitations. So many physical symptoms. One of the things we see the most is that folks will go into the emergency room thinking they've had a heart attack, and actually they're having a panic attack. So it's important to recognize that when you are experiencing these symptoms, you may want to check in with whether it could actually be influenced by anxiety. I've shared some of the subtle signs, but I'll share some here as well. Perfectionism, indecisiveness, avoidance behavior. So not avoiding friends, avoiding work, avoiding having a conversation. Procrastination, so putting stuff off, and precrastination. Precrastination, if you haven't heard of it, is where you have so much anxiety about your to-do list that as soon as something is added to your to-do list, you have to get rid of it as soon as possible. So it's like you have to check things off your list. You cannot wait when there's a job that needs to get done. That's precrastination. Again, remember that it's okay to respond in a lot of different ways right now. So distracting yourself, crying, not having it all figured out, feeling overwhelmed. What I'm trying to bring home here, folks, is that there are so many different ways that we respond when we are experiencing the anxiety that is all around us right now. So don't beat yourself up if you're experiencing some of these things. Just a quick note, because this is so important. So anxiety takes place in one teeny tiny part of our brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is the guard dog of our brain. So it's about the size, it takes place on like two little nodes that are like the size of almonds, which is I think Greek is for almond is amygdala. And so that is where all your fear and anxiety is stored. It's this tiny part of your brain. But when we feel fear and anxiety, the amygdala tells our brain to go into fight, flight, or freeze. It releases tons of hormones that help us to go into survival mode. And unfortunately, what also happens is that it shuts down our frontal lobe, this part of our brain right here. The frontal lobe is in charge of logical thinking and reasoning. So it's the most advanced part of our brain that gets shut down when the amygdala is triggered. What makes the amygdala get triggered? Any form of stress or threat. So here's fight, flight, and freeze. These are the three common responses to stress or threat. So fight, pretty self-explanatory. You might feel your jaw clench, your jaw gets tight, your fists are clenched, you're ready to kick someone's butt. That's one way we can respond to a threat. Another is to run away. So you feel that urge to get out of the place. You feel your breathing get tight. You feel trapped. You just need to get it out, okay? Lastly, there's freeze. Freeze as a response to stress is when we go absolutely numb. We might feel paralyzed. We get stiff. We may not do anything. And a lot of freeze can sometimes look like the symptoms of depression. There's that prefrontal cortex I was talking about. This is the part that gets shut down when our brain senses a threat. Because what it does is it's trying to prioritize its functioning into survival mechanisms instead of to like higher functioning. Like usually when a bear is chasing you, you don't need to worry about what's, 10 times 46, right? So we shut down that part of the brain so that your brain can focus on more important things like staying alive. Okay, let's take a minute and talk about depression. I'm going to move quickly here because we've got a lot more to go. So there's a difference between feeling down and depression. Feeling down is a temporary state of sadness, low mood, or irritability, and completely normal, by the way. Depression is a mood disorder, and it can lead to persistent feelings of sadness, guilt, or loss of interest that has a detrimental effect on one's daily life. So just like anxiety, except the symptoms look a little different. Let's look at them. So the physical symptoms of depression: fatigue, low energy, increased pain, aching muscles, headaches, stomach issues. You can see stomach issues come up a lot. Appetite changes, and sleep disturbances. There's definitely some overlap here with anxiety. And the psychological symptoms, which can be more concerning: suicidal thoughts, difficulty with work, home, or school life, irritability, agitation, feelings of worthlessness, difficulty concentrating. The subtle signs of depression are similar to those of anxiety. The things that you may want to pay special attention to are things like mood swings, changes in your hygiene can suggest that there might be some depression, feeling more feelings of guilt, less care for your appearance, and again, losing interest in things you enjoy. So the thing to remember again is that everyone copes differently, and we need to be very gracious about that. Just one quick note, another thing that we're seeing in addition to anxiety responses and depressive responses is grief. Grief is a normal response to loss of something or someone. And the truth is that most people have experienced some form of grief in 2020. These are the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But it's really important to recognize that grief is not linear. Why do I bring this up? Well, you can see that depression is one of the pieces of grief, and so is anger, and so is denial. A lot of times we may feel those feelings, but not recognize that what's actually going on for us is that we're grieving. We're upset because we had to cancel a wedding. We're upset because we couldn't take the vacation we hoped for. We're upset because the job we thought we had didn't come through. So you may be experiencing some of these things, and actually what the umbrella of your experience is grief. Grief can look differently, but a lot of it can be similar to depression and anxiety as well. Trauma is when an experience leaves a mark that has a lasting impact on an individual. I bring it up because there have been lots of traumatic experiences this year for folks, from Black Lives Matter to dealing with the COVID crisis. And so trauma is something that we must take seriously. Professional support for trauma is extremely important. Okay, sometimes when you think you're feeling an emotion for no good reason, there is a good reason. You just aren't connected to the why. So trust that your body is feeling something, and there's a wisdom in that. I say this because sometimes people say, I don't know why I'm feeling upset or irritable or tired. There's no good reason. But there is usually something underneath. So be kind to yourself when you're feeling a feeling that you don't yet understand the origin of. Here's the good news: being intentional about our mental health works. So let's dive into what we can do. Here we go. The first thing, and I say this first because it is probably the most important, we must redefine realistic expectations. It is not fair to expect the way you're working now to be exactly the same as it was before COVID. It's not fair to expect that you should be able to work exactly the same at home as you would in an office. It's just not fair. And yet we are so often so hard on ourselves and expect us to be perfect or exactly the same as we were before. That's just not realistic. The concept of toxic productivity is rampant. And here's what it is. It's behaviors that prioritize productivity over well-being. We can be workaholics. We can choose work over self-care. We can choose to focus on work over our family commitments. Toxic productivity is built into how so many of us are raised. And I write articles on this because it's a big topic, but what I want to bring up here is toxic productivity gives us unrealistic expectations. It tells us we should be perfect. It tells us we should be the same as we were before. And that's just simply not true. So be on the lookout for toxic productivity or notions of that in your own mind. It's important when you're trying to focus on having the best mental health to focus on the things you can control, of which there are many. And so let's dive into what some of those are. First, as you're setting goals for yourself, wellness goals, work goals, whatever they may be, you may have seen this before, set SMART goals. What are SMART goals? One, they're specific. So instead of, I want a great job, how about, I want a job that pays this many dollars in this industry? Be specific. They're measurable. So make sure that you can actually note that there's been growth toward that goal, right? I want to earn 20 an hour when I used to earn 10. Make sure they're attainable. In other words, that they actually fit what's possible in this day and age. Make sure they're realistic. Keep in mind your own strengths and skills and your weaknesses. Don't pick a goal that is, just completely out of the ballpark of what's possible for you. And I'm not saying that there's things you can't do, but please consider your talents and strengths when you're setting a goal. And most importantly, make goals time bound. Don't just say, I'm going to work out. Say, I'm going to work out 3 times a week, every week for the next month. Okay? When we set specific goals that are SMART, then they're more likely to happen. Another thing, when we're talking about mental health and setting goals, is baby steps are so important. I love this baby because this baby is learning to walk and having a great time. And the truth is, a lot of times we get impatient with baby steps. We want to set the big goal. We want to shoot for the moon. But we know, and studies show, that when we set small, almost laughably small goals, we do better. We achieve the goals more often. Here's why. When we set goals that are too big, what happens? It triggers our amygdala. It triggers our sense of threat and overwhelm. And then our brain kind of shuts down, right? We go into fight, flight, or freeze. We're not able to think from the best part of our, the most enlightened part of our mind because we're feeling that threat. And so the big goal actually stops us from achieving it. Baby steps are where it's at when it comes to making these goals happen for you. So what I want you to know is that making mental health a priority and caring for your mental health doesn't have to be hard at all. It can be so easy. So here's a list of some less anxiety-provoking ways to take care of yourself. Making yourself a cup of tea, micro cleaning, so cleaning a small area of your room, drinking water. Hello, how many of you need to have a glass of water right now? Opening a window and breathing some fresh air, taking a shower, meditating for 5 minutes, right? Spending time with your pet. These things aren't hard at all, but we, I think sometimes just don't prioritize that these things can make a difference when it comes to our mental health. Very quickly, I'm going to go into 10 ways to support your mental health. My goal here is everyone's going to walk away with something, one baby step, of course, that they can do to help improve their mental health and be more intentional about it. So take a look at this and maybe think about what you can do this week to improve your mental health. First is mindfulness. Mindfulness is one of the most researched mental health practices. For those of you who are unaware, mindfulness doesn't have to be you become a monk, okay? Mindfulness is simply the practice of being present in the moment, and radical acceptance can be part of that as well, which is just taking things as they are, trying not to change things, keeping our mind in the present, not in the future or in the past. You can Google it for more information, but mindfulness is fantastic. What does mindfulness do? It reduces stress, improves our working memory, increases focus, helps us be more emotionally regulated. There are so many benefits to mindfulness, and it doesn't have to be hard. There are 2 apps that are very popular. Actually, I think they're number 1 and 2 in the App Store. One is called Calm, and one is called Headspace. They're both different and fantastic in their own ways, but if you haven't tried mindfulness before, I really recommend you check them out. 2, routine. Let me be specific here though. Routine means giving yourself a sense of purpose in a day and knowing what you're going to attack when it comes to what your day looks like. So what you don't want to do is wake up every day and go, what should I do today? I'm feeling like this. Maybe I'll go over here. Maybe I'll do that. No, That is not good for your mental health, because we actually, as humans, need a sense of routine because it gives us a sense of control. Here are some ideas. Wake up and go to bed at the same time every day. How many of us struggle with that? Utilizing proper hygiene is very important. So showering every day, brushing your teeth, things like that. I know this might sound silly to some of you, but actually many people struggle with doing these things when you're working from home because it's just easy to neglect them. Specifically, create a morning routine. So have what you're going to do the moment you wake up. For me, that's making my bed, stretching,